What if I told you the man who showed up in Paris might not be the same man Hollywood gave us decades ago? When Jim Carrey stepped onto the stage at the 51st Cesar Awards to accept his Lifetime Achievement honor, the applause was loud, but the internet was louder. Within hours, clips of his speech exploded across social media.
Bonjour, how are you? Oh, it's a wonderful feeling. I really took on a pretty big challenge trying to do my speech in French.
People weren't celebrating the award. They were asking one question: what happened to Jim Carrey? Once said, "None of this is real." Who mocked once said, "None of this is real." Who mocked secret symbols on live television? Who openly criticized power structures and media manipulation? So why did he suddenly seem so normal? Now add Katt Williams into the conversation.
Researched my whole life on what the entity was before I got there, you know. My intention was to get in there and kick up some dust and try to become a whistleblower that they don't knock off. Because, you know, they get all the whistles.
Another comedian who claims Hollywood silences people who speak too loudly. Fans are connecting dots. They're asking if Jim changed, or if something changed him. Is this just aging and lighting tricks? Or is there something bigger hiding in plain sight? Because once you start looking closely, things don't look the same anymore. When Jim Carrey walked onto that stage in Paris, it should have been a simple moment of celebration. The 51st César Awards honored him for a lifetime of work. Decades of comedy, drama, and unforgettable performances. From Ace Ventura to The Truman Show, from The Mask to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, he built a career on unpredictability. Jim wasn't just an actor. He was elastic, wild, explosive. His face moved in ways that didn't even seem human. That was the brand. That was the magic. But in Paris, something felt different. The clips started circulating within minutes. People zoomed in on his eyes. They compared screenshots from interviews in the early 2000s to the footage from France. Some said his eyes looked greener. Others insisted his jawline had changed. A few claimed his teeth looked different. And then came the comments that pushed it into conspiracy territory. That's not him. He looks younger. Where's the spark? The word clone started trending in comment sections. Now, to be fair, Jim Carrey is in his 60s. Faces change. Lighting changes. Camera lenses distort color. Cosmetic work is common in Hollywood, but fans argued that Jim was never the type to freeze his face. His entire career depended on exaggerated expression. Why would someone known for bending his features into cartoon shapes suddenly appear restrained? The speculation didn't start in Paris. It had been building for years. Back in 2017, Jim went viral for a red carpet interview that confused and fascinated millions. When asked about attending a fashion event, he said none of it mattered. He said there was no meaning to any of this. He said he didn't believe in personalities, not even his own. "There is no me," he told the reporter. At the time, people laughed nervously. Some called it performance art. Others thought he was going through something deeper, a spiritual awakening, maybe even an identity crisis. Jim later explained in interviews that he had experienced what many describe as ego death. He talked about the idea that Jim Carrey was just a character he created, a mask built to survive Hollywood. He described life as energy dancing for itself. For some fans, it was philosophical. For others, it felt like he was pulling back a curtain. Then there was the infamous late-night moment when he joked about secret symbols and the all-mocking tongue. On Jimmy Kimmel Live, he exaggeratedly accused talk show hosts of distracting the public. He made it sound absurd, almost cartoonish, but the clip has been replayed thousands of times with a different tone. In a world where satire and sincerity blur together, people began asking, was he joking or hinting? Jim has never been shy about criticizing systems of power. He spoke openly against greed and corruption. He criticized what he called capitalism without conscience. He used his platform to mock politicians from both sides. That willingness to step outside the Hollywood script made him unpredictable, and unpredictability makes audiences uncomfortable. Then his personal life took a tragic turn. In 2015, his former girlfriend passed away under heartbreaking circumstances. The media storm that followed was intense. Lawsuits, accusations, headlines. It was messy and painful. Jim denied wrongdoing, and eventually the legal case was dismissed. But the emotional toll was visible. He retreated further from the spotlight after that. When he returned to interviews years later, he seemed calmer, slower, more reflective. The chaotic energy of early Jim had evolved into something quieter. Some saw growth, others saw suppression. Around the same period, he and Jenny McCarthy had previously faced backlash for controversial comments about vaccines and autism treatment. That debate sparked enormous criticism. Major medical organizations pushed back strongly. Public opinion turned harsh. For some fans, this was the moment Hollywood distanced itself from him. For others, it was proof he was willing to challenge powerful institutions, even if it cost him reputation. So by the time Paris happened, there was already a narrative forming. A man who questioned reality, a man who criticized systems, a man who stepped away from the machine. And now he reappears, polished, smiling, grateful. That contrast is what fueled the fire. Because the human brain hates discontinuity. When someone we've watched for 30 years suddenly shifts tone, we search for explanations. Sometimes the explanation is simple. People age. They change. Trauma reshapes them. Spiritual experiences reframe priorities. But the internet doesn't reward simple answers. It rewards dramatic ones. Enter the clone theory. Online forums began compiling comparison videos, old interviews versus new footage, freeze frames of eye color differences, side-by-side images analyzing facial symmetry, claims that the energy wasn't the same. Some pointed to other celebrity replacement rumors over the years and argued this was another case. The theory goes like this. Powerful industries silence disruptive voices, then replace them with compliant versions. There is no verified evidence supporting that claim. Human cloning at the level of memory transfer remains science fiction. But that hasn't stopped the idea from spreading. Once a theory attaches to a moment of uncertainty, it grows legs. And then Katt Williams' past comments resurfaced. Katt has openly spoken about Hollywood gatekeeping. He's claimed that comedians who refuse certain compromises get sidelined. He said that people are paid not to speak on certain topics. Whether taken literally or metaphorically, his statements resonated with audiences already suspicious of entertainment power structures. So now fans are drawing a line between two outspoken comedians. One says Hollywood silences truth. The other once said, none of this is real. One continues speaking boldly. The other appears to have softened. Is that evidence of something sinister, or just the natural evolution of a man who's lived a very public, very intense life? That's the tension driving this story. Because when Jim Carrey smiles in Paris, people aren't just seeing a speech. They're seeing history layered over a face they think they know. They're comparing nostalgia to reality. And sometimes nostalgia wins. The bigger question might not be whether Jim changed. It might be why we struggle to accept that he could. As the Paris footage kept circulating, the conversation shifted from appearance to intention. People weren't just asking why Jim Carrey looked different. They were asking why he seemed different. The wild card energy that once defined him felt dialed down. The man who used to hijack interviews with absurdist humor now appeared composed, gracious, almost diplomatic. For some viewers, that maturity made sense. For others, it felt like a personality rewrite. To understand why this reaction was so intense, you have to remember what Jim represented at his peak. In the 1990s and early 2000s, he wasn't just another actor. He was chaos packaged as charisma. In films like The Mask and Ace Ventura, he stretched the limits of physical comedy. In The Truman Show, he exposed a fictional world controlled by unseen producers. That movie in particular hits differently today. A man living inside a manufactured reality, slowly realizing everything around him is staged. Fans now point to that role and say it mirrors his real life in eerie ways. Then there's his philosophical evolution. Over the last decade, Jim began speaking openly about identity as an illusion. He described Jim Carrey as a constructed character, something built for survival and success. In multiple interviews, he explained that the ego is a mask, and peace comes when you realize you're not the mask. For many people, that's a legitimate spiritual perspective rooted in non-dual philosophy. But for conspiracy communities, Those statements take on a different tone. When someone says there is no me, the internet sometimes hears the original is gone. This is where perception becomes powerful. The internet doesn't process nuance well. It thrives on contrast. Old Jim versus new Jim. Loud versus calm. Rebel versus award recipient. When the brain sees a gap, it fills it with narrative. And narrative spreads faster than facts. Supporters of the clone theory often point to what they call energy shifts. They say the old Jim had an unpredictable spark in his eyes. Something electric and slightly dangerous. The Paris version, they argue, felt safe. But here's what's interesting. Energy is subjective. It's shaped by lighting, camera angles, context, and expectation. A formal award ceremony in France is not the same environment as a chaotic American red carpet. Still, the speculation intensified when older clips resurfaced, especially the moment on Jimmy Kimmel Live, where Jim joked about the Illuminati symbol. He exaggeratedly accused talk show hosts of distracting the public while secret meetings happened in the woods. It was comedy layered with satire. The audience laughed. Jimmy Kimmel laughed. Jim leaned into absurdity. But years later, that clip feels heavier to some viewers. In a time when distrust in institutions is high, satire starts looking like confession. Then people connected it to larger cultural distrust. Trust in media, government, and corporations has been declining in the United States for years. When public confidence drops, alternative explanations rise. That's not new. It's sociology. When people feel excluded from power, they search for hidden structures that explain their frustration. So when a celebrity once critical of power appears changed, it fits neatly into an existing belief system. Add to that the tragic chapter of Jim's personal life. The death of his former girlfriend in 2015 created headlines filled with accusation and pain. Legal battles followed, though they were eventually dismissed. But emotionally, it marked a visible turning point. Jim withdrew more deeply. Interviews became rarer. When he did speak, it was often about grief, art, and detachment from fame. Grief changes people. Trauma softens edges or hardens them. It can quiet someone who was once loud. But for viewers who don't live inside that grief, the shift feels mysterious. And mystery invites theories. Another layer came from his earlier involvement in controversial vaccine debates alongside Jenny McCarthy. Their public statements sparked backlash from medical professionals and major institutions. The criticism was intense. For some fans, that moment proved he was willing to challenge dominant narratives. For critics, it damaged credibility. Either way, it placed him in opposition to powerful organizations. In conspiracy culture, opposition equals target. So when Jim appeared years later looking different, the storyline was ready. Outspoken figure challenges, systems to faces, backlash to disappears, to returns change. But here's where we have to separate emotional logic from physical reality. There is no verified scientific evidence that human cloning with memory transfer exists. Animal cloning has been real since Dolly the sheep in the 1990s. But cloning a fully grown adult human with identical consciousness remains science fiction. The idea that memories are stored in bone fragments and transferable like a hard drive is not supported by mainstream neuroscience. That doesn't stop viral claims. The internet also has a history of celebrity replacement rumors. From musicians to political figures, whenever someone looks different, the same pattern emerges. Side-by-side photos, slowed-down video clips, analysis of ear shapes and teeth spacing. It becomes a digital detective game. And once someone emotionally commits to the theory, confirmation bias takes over. Every new photo becomes proof. Meanwhile, another name entered the discussion: Katt Williams. Katt has repeatedly spoken about Hollywood gatekeeping and what he describes as a cabal that controls opportunity. He's claimed that people who refuse to compromise get blackballed. Whether metaphorical or literal, those statements resonate with audiences skeptical of the industry. So fans began linking the narratives. If Katt says Hollywood silences truth-tellers and Jim once appeared to question power, then maybe Jim was silenced too. But silencing doesn't always mean removal. Sometimes it means evolution. People change priorities. After decades in the spotlight, constant controversy can become exhausting. Financial security reduces the need to fight publicly. Spiritual practice encourages detachment. Aging itself shifts perspective. A 30-year-old Jim Carrey is not the same human as a 60-year-old Jim Carrey, yet nostalgia resists that idea. When we fall in love with a celebrity persona, we freeze them in time. We want them to remain the version that entertained us during our formative years. If they mature, slow down, or soften, it feels like loss. The brain translates that loss into suspicion. The Paris moment triggered that collective nostalgia. Fans weren't just comparing physical features, they were comparing eras. The era of outrageous comedy versus the era of reflection. The era of cultural rebellion versus the era of lifetime awards. There's also the simple reality of presentation. Award ceremonies involve stylists, lighting design, camera filters, and international broadcast standards. Color grading alone can alter eye tones on screen. Makeup can change perceived age. Dental work can subtly shift facial structure. None of that is unusual in Hollywood. But conspiracy narratives don't thrive on normal explanations. They thrive on tension. The most fascinating part of this story isn't whether Jim Carrey changed. It's how quickly the internet decided what that change meant. Within hours, strangers had built entire timelines explaining his transformation. They linked interviews, tragedies, political distrust, and secret societies into one cohesive storyline. That says something bigger about our culture. We are living in an era where information travels instantly, but context doesn't. A clip from 2017 can resurface in 2026, stripped of tone and timing. A joke becomes prophecy. A philosophical statement becomes evidence. And when people already distrust institutions, every anomaly feels intentional. So now the narrative sits at a crossroads. On one side, a man who has openly explored spirituality, grief, and detachment from fame, who ages like every human does, and who delivered a formal speech at a prestigious European ceremony. On the other side, a theory that powerful forces replace outspoken figures with compliant versions to maintain control. The truth may be far less dramatic than either extreme, but drama spreads faster. And as the speculation grows, one question lingers in the background, not just about Jim Carrey, but about all of us. Why are we so ready to believe that change must mean conspiracy? By the time the Paris clips had made their third round across social media, the conversation wasn't really about Jim Carrey anymore. It had become about trust. Trust in celebrities, trust in institutions, trust in what we see on a screen. And once trust becomes the main character, every small detail starts to feel symbolic. People began revisiting older interviews again, especially the ones where Jim blurred the line between comedy and existential philosophy. He talked about ego death. He described fame as a constructed illusion. He said the version of him the world loved was a character, one designed to entertain, to distract, to survive. When he said, "There is no me," some people heard enlightenment, others heard erasure. But here's the deeper layer most people skip over. Jim Carrey has always been performing, even when he's being philosophical. That doesn't mean he's lying. It means performance is his language. He expresses ideas through exaggeration. When he mocks secret symbols on a late-night show, he does it theatrically. When he critiques capitalism, he does it passionately. When he accepts an award in Paris, he does it graciously. Different environments call for different tones. Yet conspiracy thinking removes environment from the equation. It flattens context. It turns evolution into replacement. This is where Katt Williams' commentary adds fuel to the fire. Katt has spoken about Hollywood as if it's a closed ecosystem, one that rewards compliance and sidelines dissent. He's framed the entertainment industry as a power structure that protects itself. For audiences already skeptical of media elites, those statements feel validating. So when they see Jim Carrey looking calmer, softer, less rebellious, they connect it to that narrative. But correlation isn't confirmation. Hollywood absolutely has power dynamics. So does every major industry. Gatekeeping exists. Politics exist. Reputation management exists. None of that requires cloning laboratories or secret bone fragments storing memories. The leap from powerful industry to human replacement program is emotional, not scientific. Still, the theory spreads because it solves a psychological discomfort. The discomfort is this: heroes change. When we first meet public figures, we attach to the version that resonates with us at that moment in our lives. For many Americans, Jim Carrey represented freedom from seriousness. He was the elastic face of the 90s. He embodied rebellion through humor. Watching him now, older, measured, composed, forces us to confront our own aging. The wild energy of our youth doesn't last forever. That realization can feel unsettling. So instead of accepting change, it feels easier to believe something external happened. There's also the broader cultural climate. We live in a time where institutional failures have eroded public confidence. Political polarization, media scandals, corporate controversies, all of it builds a backdrop of suspicion. When suspicion becomes the default lens, anomalies look intentional. A different eye color under European lighting becomes evidence. A calmer voice becomes programming. The human brain is wired for pattern recognition. That wiring once helped us survive. If something in the environment changed, we paid attention. But in the digital age, that instinct is amplified. We are exposed to thousands of micro changes daily. Filtered photos, edited clips, AI enhancements, algorithm-driven feeds. Our brains struggle to distinguish natural variation from manipulation. Add artificial intelligence to the mix, and the anxiety grows. Deepfakes exist, voice cloning software exists, image editing is seamless. So when someone looks slightly different on camera, the mind jumps to technological explanations. The possibility of digital alteration makes physical alteration feel plausible, but there's no verified evidence that Jim Carrey has been replaced, cloned, or digitally swapped at the Cesar Awards. What we do have is a man in his 60s, standing under bright stage lighting, delivering a speech in a second language at a formal event. We have decades of philosophical interviews showing his worldview evolving. We have documented grief, controversy, retreat, and return. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the most human one. Grief humbles people. Age slows people. Spiritual exploration softens people. Financial independence reduces urgency. None of those transformations are dramatic enough for viral headlines, but they're real. And here's another uncomfortable truth. When celebrities step back from outrage culture, audiences sometimes feel abandoned. If Jim once challenged systems loudly and now appears less combative, some fans interpret that as surrender. But personal peace doesn't always equal compliance. It can simply mean exhaustion with conflict. Katt Williams chooses to stay combative. That's his lane. His personality thrives in confrontation. Jim Carrey's lane, at least right now, appears reflective. Two comedians, two different coping mechanisms. That doesn't require a shadow operation to explain it. The internet also tends to compress timelines. A man's 30-year career becomes a highlight reel of his most extreme moments. We forget the quiet interviews, the subtle performances, the transitions between chapters. When we compare old Jim to new Jim, we're often comparing a curated montage to a single modern clip. And nostalgia is powerful. Nostalgia edits memory. It amplifies charisma. It smooths flaws. It turns chaotic energy into legendary spark. So when present reality doesn't match that edited memory, it feels off. The Paris moment became a mirror, not just for Jim Carrey, but for how we process public figures. Do we allow them to evolve, or do we demand they remain frozen in the era we prefer? The clone theory says he didn't evolve. He was replaced. The human explanation says he changed. One narrative is thrilling. The other is ordinary. But ordinary doesn't mean insignificant. It means human. What makes this story compelling isn't the science fiction angle. It's the cultural reflection. In a world where trust feels fragile, even a comedian's facial expression can ignite suspicion. That tells us more about our collective mindset than it does about the man on stage. Jim Carrey once said he believed we are a field of energy dancing for itself. Whether you see that as poetic or abstract, it points to impermanence. Identities shift, masks fall off, new ones appear. That doesn't require a laboratory, it requires time. And maybe the real question isn't whether the Jim Carrey in Paris was authentic. Maybe the question is whether we're comfortable watching our icons grow older, quieter, and more complex than the characters they once played. Because if we aren't, the internet will always offer a more dramatic alternative. A clone is easier to accept than change. And change is the one thing no one escapes. When you look at the footage now, without the side-by-side comparisons, without the slowed-down analysis, without the dramatic music, what do you actually see? A replacement? Or a man who has lived long enough to become different from the version you remember? If you made it this far, then you already know this story isn't just about Jim Carrey. It's about perception, it's about how fast narratives spread, and it's about how quickly the internet can turn a moment into a movement. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Jim Carrey simply evolved with age and experience? Or do you believe something deeper is happening behind the scenes in Hollywood? When outspoken voices like Jim Carrey and Katt Williams challenge power structures, is that bravery, or does it come with consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have a real conversation, respectfully and intelligently. If you enjoy deep dives like this, where we break down viral moments, celebrity controversies, and the psychology behind internet theories, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Because in a world full of headlines and half-truths, the real story is usually more complex than it first appears. And sometimes, asking the right questions matters more than the answers.